Ever feel like you're talking to a brick wall trying to get through to someone? Like you're putting in all this effort, but they're just not really there.
Oh, absolutely. You know that feeling of just banging your head against a wall? Like, are we even speaking the same language? It's like, it's universal.
And get this, the author we're diving into today, Mark Goulston, compares that feeling to being taken hostage.
Okay, now that's not an analogy you hear every day. Tell me more.
Right. His book, Just Listen, it starts with this intense story about a hostage situation. And it's not your typical communication advice, but it really makes you see things differently. Goulston says when someone's not hearing you, it's like they're the hostage taker of the conversation. Like you're stuck and it feels impossible to break free.
Wow, that's a really powerful image. And, I can see how that applies to so many everyday situations. Think about it. We've all been there with a boss or a partner or even a friend or family member where it's like their resistance is holding you hostage.
Exactly. And so the book dives into how to become like this skilled negotiator in those situations, someone who can de-escalate the tension and actually get the other person to listen.
So not trying to overpower them with logic or demands or anything like that, more like building a connection.
Exactly. Goulston actually tells this gripping story about this hostage negotiator, Detective Kramer. He's dealing with this guy, Frank, who's holed up in a car with a shotgun. And instead of like barging in with solutions, Kramer does something kind of unexpected. He starts mirroring Frank's feelings. He says things like, I bet you feel like nobody understands what it's like to have tried everything and be stuck with this as your only way out.
Wow, that's instead of talking down to him, he's really stepping into his reality.
Exactly.
Even though it's a scary reality.
And that's what's so counterintuitive about it, but also really effective. By mirroring, Kramer builds a connection with Frank, and it creates this space where Frank feels seen and heard. And that's when the real communication can actually begin.
You know what I think is so interesting is that most of us do the opposite. When someone is upset or resistant, we try to logic them out of it.
Totally.
We jump in with solutions.
All the advice.
Yes.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah, we're so quick to dismiss their feelings. But Goulston's approach is all about first achieving what he calls buy-in, getting that other person to drop their defenses and actually consider your point of view.
It's that turning point.
Yeah.
It's that click where they go from I'm not listening to, okay, maybe I'll hear you out.
And to get there, Goulston taps into some really fascinating neuroscience. Have you ever heard of mirror neurons?
I have, actually.
Yeah.
It's that whole idea that we have these neurons in our brains that fire not only when we do something, but also when we watch someone else do it. It's like our brains are wired for empathy.
Exactly. And Goulston says this is a huge part of why mirroring works so well. When we can accurately reflect someone's emotions back to them, it's like we're speaking their language on this deeper level.
It's like saying, I see you, I hear you, I get you, without actually having to say it.
And that feeling of being seen and understood, it just opens up communication in a way that logic and reasoning just rarely can.
It's like you're building a bridge instead of a wall.
It's like you're building a bridge instead of a wall.
Right. And speaking of bridges, Goulston shares this story about one of his patients, Jack, who was dealing with really severe paranoia. And instead of trying to reason with Jack or dismiss his fears, Goulston does something so unexpected. He looks Jack in the eye and says, Jack, I believe you.
Wow, that's a powerful example of this mirroring in action. Imagine being in Jack's shoes. You're so used to people dismissing you or trying to fix you, and then to hear that validation, it must have been really transformative for him.
Absolutely. And Goulston says that's when the real breakthrough happened for Jack.
Yeah.
It wasn't about whether Goulston actually believed in Jack's delusions or not, but by simply acknowledging and validating Jack's feelings, he created this safe space for Jack to actually start questioning his own beliefs. So by mirroring those feelings, even if they seem completely irrational on the surface, he was able to reach the part of Jack that was open to healing and change.
It's like that saying, people don't care how much you know until they know how much you care. But here's the thing. We're not always dealing with our own calm, rational selves, right?
Yeah.
Sometimes our emotions get the better of us, and that's where things can really go off the rails in communication.
Oh, 100%. We've all been there.
Yeah.
And Goulston explains this through what he calls the three-part brain model. The idea that our brains are essentially like a three-story building.
Okay, I'm picturing a brain building now.
Yeah.
Walk me through the floors.
All right, so picture this. At the base, you have the reptilian brain. Yeah, that's the oldest part. It's responsible for our basic survival instincts, fight, flight, freeze, that kind of thing.
Okay.
Then as we move up a floor, we've got the mammal brain. This is where our emotions hang out. Love, fear, anger, all that good stuff. And finally at the top, the penthouse suite, if you will, is the primate brain. That's the most evolved part of our brain. It's in charge of logic, reasoning, decision-making, all the higher level stuff.
Got it. So we've got this whole brain party going on, but then sometimes the music stops. It's like someone yelled fire, In a crowded room.
Exactly. And that's where the amygdala comes in. It's like the fire alarm of the brain located down in that basement level, that reptilian brain. And when we perceive a threat, real or imagined, the amygdala sends out that SOS signal and boom.
Amygdala hijack.
Amygdala hijack. Our rational brain, the Pinellas Party people, they don't stand a chance.
They're out of there.
Gone. And suddenly those primal survival instincts take over. And we're not exactly thinking clearly or making our best decisions. You know that feeling when, you should calm down, but every part of you is screaming, fight back or run away.
Oh, yeah.
Yep. That's amygdala calling the shots.
So how do we quiet that fire alarm? How do we stop ourselves, or even better, help someone else from getting hijacked by their amygdala? Because let's be real, trying to have a rational conversation with someone in full-on amygdala hijack mode.
It's like trying to have a conversation with a runaway train.
Exactly. So what do we do? Does Goulston offer any hope here?
He does. And it might sound familiar. Remember that feeling of being seen and understood that we were talking about earlier?
Yeah.
That's actually key to both preventing and dealing with amygdala hijack. When we validate someone's feelings, even if we don't agree with their actions, it can actually help to calm that amygdala alarm.
It's like we're sending this message to their brain saying, hey, it's okay, you're safe, we can work through this together.
Precisely. And one super practical technique Goulston suggests is what he calls the 4-second rule. When you feel yourself getting heated, or you can sense the other person is about to go into amygdala hijack, just take 4 slow, deep breaths.
So simple, so effective.
Right. It gives your prefrontal cortex, that's the reasoning part of your brain, a chance to catch up and regain control from the amygdala. And that pause can make all the difference in how the conversation unfolds.
It's like hitting the pause button on that runaway train, giving everyone a chance to catch their breath before things go completely off the rails.
And sometimes that pause is all it takes to just shift the energy and get the conversation back on track.
This reminds me of Goulston's story about his own father who was struggling with Alzheimer's. Here's Goulston, the communication expert, but he was hitting a wall with his own dad. What did he do?
Because even with all the knowledge in the world, sometimes those emotional barriers are just the toughest to break through.
Exactly. But Goulston has this beautiful realization. Instead of trying to force his agenda or solutions on his father, he simply asks, so Dad, how are you doing?
And in that moment, by just acknowledging his father's feelings, showing genuine empathy, Goulston was able to connect with his dad on this heart-to-heart level. It's a beautiful reminder that even when it's hard, leading with empathy can make all the difference.
It's like that quote, people may not remember what you said, but they'll always remember how you made them feel. And I think that's what Goulston is getting at here. It's not just about the techniques themselves. It's really about that underlying intention of truly wanting to connect and understand.
Absolutely. It's about creating that space, where the other person feels safe enough to kind of let down their guard and really, truly listen. And once that happens, the real communication, the real connection can begin.
So we've covered a lot of ground here. The hostage analogy, mirror neurons, that 3-part brain we talked about, and how to handle those amygdala hijack situations. But I want to make sure our listeners walk away with some concrete tools they can use. What are some key takeaways, some like Goulston gems that we can leave them with?
Ooh, Goulston gems. I like that. Well, first and foremost, reflective listening is key. And I don't mean just like nodding along while you're waiting for your turn to talk. It's about really tuning in to the other person's emotions, not just their words, and reflecting those feelings back to them.
So like we were saying earlier, showing them, we see them, we hear them, we get them, even if we don't agree with everything they're saying.
Exactly. And another gem, ask open-ended questions that invite the other person to share their perspective. So instead of like coming in with your own solutions or opinions right off the bat, try asking things like, what are your thoughts on this? Or can you tell me more about what's important to you in this situation?
It's about shifting from, here's what I think, to tell me what you think.
Right. And that simple shift can make all the difference in how the conversation unfolds. Because when people feel heard and understood, they're much more likely to be open to our perspective.
It's like we're saying, hey, we're on the same team here. Let's figure this out together.
Exactly. And speaking of teams, don't forget the importance of self-awareness. Goulston reminds us we need to be mindful of our own emotions and how they might be influencing the conversation.
So basically, we need to check ourselves before we wreck ourselves.
And the conversation. Because if we're about to have our own amygdala hijack, we're not going to be much help to anyone else. So take a pause, take a breath, and remember that it's okay to have different perspectives.
It's like that old saying, you can't control the wind, but you can adjust your sails.
Ooh, I like that one. And I think that's a perfect note to end on. Remember, effective communication is a skill, not a talent. It takes practice. But with the right tools and techniques, we can all become better communicators and build stronger, more fulfilling relationships.
And speaking of practice, why not start today? Think about one person you've been struggling to connect with. What's one Goulston gem you can use in your very next conversation with them? Maybe it's that 4-second pause. Maybe it's a heartfelt, "How are you doing?" Or maybe it's just really, truly listening to what they have to say.
Beautiful, Sala.
Yeah,
Small changes can make a big difference.
absolutely. That's all the time we have for today's deep dive into the art and science of reaching anyone. We've just scratched the surface of what Goulston covers in his book, so we'll be sure to include links in the show notes if you want to explore this further. Until next time, happy listening and happy connecting.